Meet George Hackenschmidt, one of the greatest strength athletes and professional wrestlers of all time. We will take a detailed look at the life and times of George and some of his vital contributions to the world of training. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Let's talk a little about his background. George Karl Julius Hackenschmidt was born on 1 August 1878 in Dorpat of Livonia, Russian Empire, which would come to be known as modern-day Estonia. He was born to a family of 5, where he was the eldest of 3 siblings. He had a younger sister and brother, Alice and Bruno. Although their parents were not blessed with incredible body physique, all the kids turned out to be physically gifted and excelled in physical activities and sporting events. However, dear old George was in a different class of his own. When he was only 9 years old, he weighed over 120 pounds, standing at 4 feet and 7 inches. George showed tremendous potential from a young age and was involved in a number of sports as a teenager in high school. He was particularly fond of gymnastics, while also regularly participating in other sporting activities such as swimming, cycling, running, weightlifting, and garodki, which is a type of bowling common in Eastern European countries. Teachers in his high school were amazed with the kind of strength and physicality that George possessed. Reports had it that during his mid-teen years, George lifted barbells weighing over 330 pounds and set other mind-blowing records in weightlifting during his high school days. After leaving school, George started work at an engineering factory in the town of Reval, the region now known as Tallinn today, where he trained as a blacksmith. He excelled as a hard worker, and because of his diligence and natural strength, he became quite popular in the province. Although he was a respectable and popular skilled worker, he didn't abandon his passion for bodybuilding, and he kept training to be a strongman and professional wrestler. He also engaged in sports events and participated in other sports such as cycling, athletics, and wrestling, training vigorously and even winning some local competitions. Did his persistence pay off? Yes, it did. Let's begin by examining his professional wrestling career a little. George's final breakthrough would come in 1896 when he competed in a professional wrestling match. You see, in that year, Georg Lurich, another wrestler who was widely known at the time, was on tour with a crew of professional wrestlers. On this tour, he came into George's town and announced a challenge. Our dear friend George Hackenschmidt volunteered and entered into the challenge. And guess what? He lost woefully. But this event will go on to shape dear old George's passion for his life ambition. He understood what he wanted for the rest of his life. It was in that moment of defeat that he knew he wanted to be a bodybuilder, strongman, and professional wrestler. How can we be sure? Well, just a year later, another wrestler came to the town of Revel. His name was Fritz Konietzko. Just like Georg Lurich, he also announced a challenge, which Hackenschmidt promptly took up, and unlike in the previous, his performance was much better, showing a lot of improvement. After that, he would meet another individual who would change his life forever. George Hackenschmidt met the personal doctor of the Tsar of Russia, Dr. Vladislav Krajewski. The good doctor encountered George after he was injured when working at the factory. And when he noticed that George had potential, passion, and the physique to back it all up, he invited young George to come under his mentorship. So, for the next 2 years, George lived with and trained under the supervision and tutelage of Dr. Krajewski. In time, George began competing in professional wrestling and weightlifting competitions, and he won many laurels and started gaining fame and recognition among bodybuilders and professional wrestlers. 2 years after being under the care and tutelage of Dr. Krajewski, George took his wrestling and weightlifting career with more seriousness. In 1889, he competed in the Greco-Roman Amateur Wrestling Championship in Europe and the Russian Weightlifting Championship, and won both tournaments. It was around 1899, after he left the army, that he fought for the title of Russian champion of 1899 and won against Alexander von Schmeling. He defeated von Schmeling once more just 3 days following the first bout, earning the title of Russian champion of 1899. As if that wasn't enough, George went to the World Wrestling Championships in Paris, just 4 months after his fight with Alexander von Schmeling. It was in that tournament that George would get the nickname the Russian Lion. It was also in 1899 that George Hackenschmidt would invent something close to what we call now a bench press. But we'll get to that later. For now, let's talk a little about George's career and style in weightlifting and bodybuilding. Regarding George's weightlifting prowess, people started to take notice of George's strength in 1896 during a local club festival. George's amazing lifts, which included a 214-pound one-arm shoulder press, amazed the festival goers. Furthermore, George performed these heavy lifts with almost flawless form. With the strength of his biceps, he carefully raised the weight off the ground and then brought it up with his shoulders. Going further, one of George's greatest weightlifting competitions was held in April 1898. Many of the top weightlifters in the area came to the lifting event hosted by the Raval Athletic Club to demonstrate their strength. George ultimately showed that he was the strongest of all of them by winning the day. His weightlifting records at the competition were 251 pounds for the jerk, 256 pounds for the snatch, and 269 pounds for the one-arm press. George continued to train hard for the next 6 months following the event, with assistance from the doctor at Revel Athletic Club. They collaborated to increase George's strength even more. George broke the previous record of 269.5 pounds with a one-hand press after 6 months of intense training. In 1901, George would bring a new innovation to bodybuilding by introducing a new kind of routine. George accomplished yet another career milestone on January 27, 1901. He had an intense style. For example, the move that birthed the Hacksquat went as thus. He'd squat with the barbell behind his thighs, near his lower buttocks, until his upper legs are parallel to the floor. With his knees bent, he hoisted 187 pounds of weight behind his back, creating a new world record. The Hacksquat was named after him, like his surname, Hackenschmidt. The Hacksquat is still performed till today. The Hacksquat would be one of his greatest legacies that remain long after his death. Another technique is the famous iron cross. This is a technique where he would grasp 89 pounds in his left hand and 90 pounds in his right, with both arms fully extended. This workout became known as the Iron Cross. Even though George quit lifting weights competitively in 1903, at the age of 25, his talent in weightlifting was similarly excellent. He could power clean 361 pounds, press 280 pounds, jerk 330 pounds, and press 286 pounds with one arm while standing. For more than 50 years, his 2 pullover and press reps, using 311 pounds in the wrestler's bridge position, were an unofficial record. He was also renowned for carrying 90-pound weights in each hand and bearing a crucifix on his strong shoulders. This has definitely got us wondering, what did George's training style entail? To answer that, we need to know that it all depended on his schedule. Most times he would work out 2 to 6 times a week. He worked out for 30 to 60 minutes at a time. He worked out heavily most of the time in the gym, performing compound exercises like squats, floor presses, and more complex movements like dumbbell isolations. In an effort to develop all muscles harmoniously, George loved to mix up his workouts and experimented with different training techniques. For instance, he would train a muscle from one angle and then modify his form to target the same muscle from a completely different position, which he felt was an efficient way to target all the fibers and strings within the muscle. It is only by exercising with heavy weights that any man can hope to develop really great strength, George said, noting that bodyweight exercises had a place in training but were not as effective in developing raw strength as heavy weights. A man may secure and maintain a condition of fair physical fitness by means of exercising without weights, but he cannot hope to become really strong unless he exercises with weights. George has always preferred heavy weights when looking to build muscle and strength. George taught people that the greatest way to build strength was to lift big weights. To gain strength and muscle, he recommended performing compound workouts like the bench press, deadlift, and squat. George had an innovative exercise regimen and a physical training concept that holds true to this day. Whatever their level of fitness, his workout and nutrition plans boost their health and overall well-being. In addition to training hard, George also made sure his body recovered from his workouts. He loved to lift heavy weights, but he never promoted pushing yourself too hard because he thought this could be harmful. If his form wasn't perfect, he would lower the weight until he could lift it with a slow, controlled movement. He once said, "Do not perform any exercise to excess, so as to tire yourself out. If you feel tired and exhausted, give yourself the necessary rest, and as in everything else, use moderation and common sense. Remember that excessive and rapid exercising is harmful." Here are a few quotes from some of his books as he explained some of his exercise activities and routines. From his book, The Way to Live, he wrote, "With one hand lifting weight slowly from the ground by the strength of the biceps, I raised a weight of 125 pounds with the right hand and of 119 pounds with the left." Another quote says, "Lying on the ground, I lifted and pushed up with two hands a weight of 304 pounds, following this soon after with a weight of 335 pounds. So let's talk about yet another contribution he made to bodybuilding. Earlier I mentioned that George Hackenschmidt is credited with inventing the bench press, but it wasn't called that during his time. George did the following. At first, it started with George laying on his back and lifting barbells towards and outwards his chest, with several reps and eventually repeating the action on the floor. George used both hands to raise and push himself up with 304 pounds on top of him. Shortly after, he broke his own record with a 334-pound floor press. Later on, the floor press would be referred to as the wrestler's bridge. The development of the bench press was greatly influenced by this exercise. But did you know that traditionalists viewed the floor press to be a contentious lift until after the 1950s? Many people thought the floor press was a lazy man's exercise, and others even say it is a means of cheating. Others thought it caused oversized pecs and poor posture. After years of dispute, the bench press would eventually become the powerlifting standard. Going further, let's now dive into his diet, which is a crucial part of any strength training routine. As expected, George was a very disciplined man, so you can imagine that he would pay strict attention to his diet. Ina Zweininger-Bargielowska once said that George preached a mostly vegetarian diet of fresh, uncooked food and nuts during his tenure in the ring. It was also said that he abstained from alcohol, coffee, and tobacco and advocated for sexual intercourse in moderation. According to Charles Cochran, George ate 8 or 9 eggs, a porterhouse steak, and a whole camembert cheese. During the height of his wrestling career, George was a significant meat eater, eating steak and half a dozen eggs as a snack, but not tinned goods, according to the legendary journalist Maurice Richardson. In contrast, sports writer Lou Friedman claims that Hackenschmidt rarely ate meat and disliked cooked food. As a result, there is some disagreement about George's diet. George became a staunch vegetarian after quitting from boxing. According to some contemporary sociological literature, George created a system of philosophy based on the values of spirituality, vegetarianism, and self-control. His fresh, uncooked vegetarian diet avoids everything that has been artificialized in any way. But this is what George himself had to say about his diet. "I believe I am right in asserting that our Creator has provided food and nutrients for every being for its own advantage. The purest natural food for human beings would therefore be fresh, uncooked food and nuts." He also said, "Much has been said lately in praise of sugar as food, but as artificial sugar is an acid-forming substance, I should not recommend it. Natural sugar, such as is contained in dates, figs, and other fruit, is certainly preferable." Irrespective of what his interest when it comes to diet is, there is no doubt that he lived a full life. George stayed physically active well into old life, and at 56, he could leap 10 times over a 4-foot 6-inch high board. He would jump 50 times over a chair once a week, bench press 150 pounds, and run 7 miles in 45 minutes, even in his mid-80s. What a guy. Having taken a look at that, let's examine his legacy. George's professional wrestling career period is known as the Golden Age of professional wrestling. Professional wrestling matches were not only more universally thought to be fairly contested, but wrestling was the most popular sport on every continent. Today, it is comparable to soccer or professional boxing. However, it was George Hackenschmidt's theatrics that pro wrestling became possibly the most popular sport in the United Kingdom at the time, and the rivalry between him and Gotch pushed it to totally new heights around the world. Lovers of wrestling of all ages collected cards and postcards with their portraits, read their books, and devoured newspaper articles about them. Their dramatic battles became front-page headlines throughout the world, comparable to today's World Cup in terms of worldwide attention, and helped to create organized amateur wrestling in the United States in the early 20th century. George's groundbreaking strength training methods and philosophy have left an indelible mark on the fitness industry. Many of today's strength training principles are inspired by his emphasis on compound movements, progressive overload, and the mind-muscle link. George's life and accomplishments provide significant lessons for individuals interested in fitness and strength training. His commitment to consistently developing his strength and wrestling abilities serves as a reminder of the value of hard effort and perseverance in reaching one's goals. Furthermore, his revolutionary strength training approaches emphasize the need of being open to new ideas and continually pushing the boundaries of physical performance. His innovative methods and views have influenced innumerable athletes and coaches, establishing the groundwork for modern strength training principles. As we continue to push the boundaries of our own physical performance, we can look to George Hackenschmidt and his pioneering approach to physical culture for inspiration. His contributions, which are evident by the styles and posture of bodybuilding that he invented that remain till date. The Hacksquat and the bench press are some of the widely used techniques and equipment used in the fitness world. From athletes to bodybuilders and ordinary people looking to keep fit, all can enjoy the moments of brilliance and ingenuity from George Hackenschmidt. He was also a prolific writer, having written books like The Way to Live and Man and Matter, which provided insights into his training methods and views. His works stress the value of a well-rounded approach to fitness, which has since become a guiding principle in modern strength training. The heritage of the Russian Lion serves as a beacon for anyone who is passionate about pushing the limits of their physical ability and living a balanced, healthy life. Indeed, for anyone who genuinely is passionate about the bodybuilding art and form and wishes to build a career out of it, George Hackenschmidt is an important case study. His wealth of experience captured in books and speeches are valuable gems to survive in this world. It is safe to note that George Hackenschmidt was a legend in his own right. The Russian Lion is someone to be remembered for ages. However, George died on February 19, 1968 of natural causes at the age of 89. He was reported to have said, "Throughout my extensive professional career, I've not bothered as to whether I was a champion or not a champion. The only title I've desired to be known by is simply my Christian name, George Hackenschmidt." That brings us to the end of today's video. If you liked this video, do let me know in the comments, and obviously leave your likes too. Do not forget to share and subscribe to our channel, Legend Bodybuilders, where we discuss legendary bodybuilders forgotten in time. Above all, activate your notification bell so you don't miss the next video when it drops. Until next time.